day, everyone. I am Pilipino, and I am the reporter for the beginnings of Sikolohiyang Filipino. So, what is Sikolohiyang Filipino? Sikolohiyang Filipino refers to the psychology born out of experience, thought, and orientation of Filipinos based on a full use of Filipino culture and language. So, when the Philippines was colonized by Spain, in the USA, the psychology taught in school was mostly Western theory and methodology. So by the time that our country was colonized by Spain, sa USA, kay, they already started teaching psychology in school, but it was more on Western theory and methodology. The two Philippine heroes, Dr. Rizal and Apolinario Mabini, express dissatisfaction at the pejorative interpretations of Filipino behavior by Western observers. So our two national heroes, which is Dr. Rizal and Apolinario Mabini, disagree about the interpretation of Western observers about the Filipino behavior. So in the 1960s, many Filipino intellectuals and scholars were already sensitive both to the inadequacy as well as the unfairness of the Western-oriented approaches to psychology. So in 1960s, Filipino scholars um, were also disagree about the unfairness. All they have a they're aware about the unfairness of the Western research about the psychology or Western study. For instance, in the area of personality, the Western approach in research of not being enmeshed and bound by the culture being studied has resulted in a characterization of the Filipino from the judgmental and impressionistic point of view of the colonizers. So, ang Western approach or Western study kay wala sila nag-base sa culture sa Filipino, and because of that it leads to um, characterization of the Filipino from the judgmental and impressionistic point of view of the colonizers. So example of it is um not telling directly sa tao nga naa kay concern, or in Bisaya term, the word libak. So, di ba, libak has a good and bad intention. So, pero if I know may other people nga it's not their intention of not telling directly kay kanang mahadlok sila makasakit ng tao. Pero some people also kay tell na dapat i-direct og ingon kay para kanang mas maano ang concern, kanang ma-feel ang concern para dili siya bad tan-awon. In the 1960s, there was no concerted effort to correct the traditional way of teaching psychology. Teaching and there was no concerted effort to correct the traditional way of teaching and studying psychology. It was in the early 1970s that this was initiated when Virgilio Gaspar Enriquez returned to the Philippines from Northwestern University, USA, with a PhD in social psychology and lost no time in introducing the concept of Sikolohiyang Filipino. So, Virgilio Gaspar Enriquez, a social psychology and also the father, or the also known as the father of psychology, returned to the Philippines to introduce the concept of Sikolohiyang Pilipino. Together with then chairman of the Department of Psychology at the University of the Philippines, Dr. Alfredo Villagmay, Enriquez embarked on a research into the historical and cultural roots of Philippine psychology. So, the former chairman of the Department of Psychology at the UP, which is Dr. Alfredo Villagmay, and Enriquez did a research about the historical and cultural roots of, or where does the Philippine psychology begin based on the history and culture of Filipinos. In the research, they also included identifying in indigenous concepts and approaches in Philippine psychology and developing creativity and attentiveness among Filipinos. So, from these researches, a two-volume bibliography on Filipino psychology and a locally developed personality test, panukat ng ugali at pagkatao, were produced. Uh, so, panukat ng ugali at pagkatao is it is the Filipino psychometrical test that aims to tap specific values, traits, and behavior of the Filipinos. So in 1975, Enriquez chaired the unang pambansang komperensya sa Sikolohiyang Pilipino or the First National Conference of Filipino Psychology, which was held at the Abelardo Auditorium at UP. In this conference, the ideas, concepts, and formulations of Sikolohiyang Filipino were formally articulated. So, when Enriquez, in year 1975, when Enriquez chaired the unang pambansang komperensya sa Sikolohiyang Pilipino, dira pa na formally articulated ang ideas, concepts, and formulations of Sikolohiyang Pilipino. So, the beginning of Sikolohiyang Pilipino talks about the history of where does the Sikolohiyang Filipino began. So it was really Virgilio Gaspar Enriquez who initiated to um, to introduce the concept of Sikolohiyang Filipino. So he returned from the USA from in early 1970s to introduce the Sikolohiyang Filipino and to correct the kanang study sa Western about the Sikolohiyang Filipino because sa Western study kay they only base it on their observation, and while Enriquez uh, did a study of kung asa jud gikan ang Sikolohiyang Pilipino based on the history and cultural roots sa Philippine psychology. So, this is all my report about, and I hope you learned something. This is Casey Florentino, your reporter. Thank you and have a nice day.